Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. Well, today it's Easter Saturday, and yesterday, obviously Good Friday, we remembered the death of our Lord Jesus Christ upon the cross of Calvary. And tomorrow is Easter Sunday, where we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and we remember that it's a vindication that he is who he said he was. But today in this video I wanted to look at an issue that I've never heard anybody speak on before, and that is the trial of Jesus Christ. The crucifixion would not have happened unless there had been a trial. He was on trial as a criminal, if we can put it like that. So what I wanted to do in this video is have a look at that trial. Did Jesus Christ the man get a fair trial? You know, we all hope in our own countries that our justice systems, our legal systems are fair. We all hope that everyone who appears before the court, before the judge, gets a fair trial. And there's a huge outcry when the criminal justice system goes wrong, when people are, if I can put it like this, framed by the state. So let's have a look and see if Jesus, the man, in this video I just want to look at Jesus, the man. I'm not too worried about the fact that Jesus is God and all the prophecies and everything concerning his death and resurrection. But let's have a look at and see if Jesus the man, the ordinary man from Galilee, let's see if Jesus got a fair trial. So in all criminal cases, every defendant charged with a crime is presumed to be innocent until he is proved guilty. And this presumption of innocence must continue throughout the whole trial. He is also entitled to every reasonable doubt, and if such reasonable doubt of guilt exists in the mind and conscience of the court, then the court must construe such doubt in the favour of the defendant and acquit him. So in this video I want to present the facts of the case, and hopefully you will see and consider properly whether Jesus of Nazareth received a fair and impartial trial. Was Jesus guilty or not guilty? So as we go through the video, we'll be hopefully looking at those facts where you can be considering those facts for yourself. Before we go any further, you can read the facts of the case for yourselves in the book of Matthew, chapter 26, verses 47 to 68, and also in the book of Mark, chapter 14, verses 43 to chapter 15, verses 20, and in the book of Luke, chapter 22, verse 17 to chapter 23, verse 25, and also in the book of John, chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 19, verse 16. The trial of Jesus is recorded in all four Gospels in the New Testament. It's that important. So who was Jesus tried by? Where was he in court in front of? He was tried by the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin was the High Court of Justice, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Tribunal of the Jews, and had 71 members. They sat as judges in the trial of Jesus with legislative, executive and judicial powers. They constituted the national parliament. It was this court that condemned our Saviour on a charge of blasphemy against God. He was tried by this tribunal under the Mosaic law. So He was tried by the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, from which there was no appeal. Its authority was supreme in all matters: civil, criminal, political, social, and religious. So since Jesus was being tried for a capital offence, this was the court by which he was tried. And in Israel, at the time of Christ, the Mosaic law was the fundamental and basic written law, but there was also what we call the Talmud, which contained the ancient traditions and rabbinic interpretations. And the contents of the Talmud were never proclaimed to the world by the state, but they were simply a master traditions and commentary translated orally through many centuries before finally being reduced to writing. Now we've got something similar here in the UK, traditional law, that type of thing. And I'm sure there's cases wherever you're watching from, if you're watching from a different country, that there's something similar in your justice system. So the Talmud, translated into English, comprised 400 books, 400 volumes of law. So that's a lot of law. So what were the charges then? What were the charges that Jesus was accused of in front of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of Israel, under the Mosaic law? What formed the basis of this trial? Firstly, the charge brought against the defendant before the court of the Sanhedrin was blasphemy against God. And the criminal indictment brought against him before Pilate and Herod was treason against the government of Rome. Two different charges there, as we can already see. So let's analyse and have a look as to see whether either the charge or indictment was properly made or well taken against the defendant before the courts of justice. So the first point, and I'll be referring to this in the notes to the video, the comments to the video, is that the Jewish law prohibited any part of legal proceedings by night. And secondly, even before Jesus' trial began, the law was broken because his arrest was illegal. The Jewish law prohibited any part of a legal proceeding in capital offences to take place at night, and Jesus was arrested at night. And it says in the Mishnah, a capital offence must be tried during the day and suspended at night. And criminal cases can be acted upon by the various courts during the daytime only. So second point, Jesus before Caiaphas was illegal because the law stated, "Be not a sole judge, for there is no sole judge but one." Again, that's in the Mishnah. And an accused man must never be subjected to private or secret examination, lest in his perplexity he furnishes damaging testimony against himself. So the high priest's private examination of Jesus was illegal. And that Jesus being privately examined before his regular trial by the Sanhedrin is clear. Whether the examiner was Annas or Caiaphas is not certainly known. John alone records the private interrogation, testifying, "The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine." This interrogation by whomever was illegal because it took place at night and was by a sole judge. Third point, the indictment against Jesus was illegal because the law stated the entire criminal procedure of the Mosaic law rests upon 4 rules. Number 1, certainty in the indictment. Number 2, publicity in the discussion. Number 3, full freedom granted to the accused and assurance against all dangers of errors of testimony. The Sanhedrin could not originate charges. It could only investigate those brought before it. So the only prosecutors were the witnesses in the crime. The witnesses constituted the charge. There was no formal indictment until these witnesses spoke in the public assembly. When they spoke and the evidence of the two agreed together, it formed the legal charge, libel or indictment. The form of the indictment was illegal. Under Hebrew justice there was no grand jury. Leading witnesses presented charges. In addition to naming a specific crime, the indictment must allege the precise acts of the accused which constitute the specific crime. Was this rule observed in framing Jesus' indictment? Was it? The fourth point is that the law stated the Sanhedrin was to sit from the close of the morning sacrifice to the time of the evening sacrifice. That's in the Talmud as well. And no session of the court could take place before the offering of the morning sacrifice. And the morning sacrifice is offered at the dawn of the day. The Sanhedrin is not to assemble until the hour after that time. Again, that's in the Talmud. So, the Sanhedrin convened before the offering of the morning sacrifice. Therefore, it was illegal. We're getting quite serious now. Starting from the fifth point, the proceedings were conducted on a day preceding a Jewish Sabbath, the weekend, also on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and on the eve of the Passover. Therefore, it was illegal because the law stated the court must not be held on the Sabbath or on any holy day. And in a Mishnah it says, again, they shall not judge on the eve of the Sabbath, nor on that of any festival. No court of justice in Israel was permitted to hold sessions on the Sabbath or any of the 7 biblical holidays. In cases of capital crime, no trial could be commenced on Friday or the day previous to any holiday, because it was not lawful either to adjourn such cases longer than overnight or to continue them on the Sabbath or holiday. And the trial was illegal because it was held on a day forbidden by the law. That is, it was a feast day and the day before the Sabbath. So the sixth point, just think of criminal trials that are held in our own day, in our own time, in our own century, in our own countries. Most criminal trials, I would say every criminal trial, takes a long time. And we hear about it in the papers, on the TV. So, the trial of Jesus was illegal because it was concluded within one day. Just think of a trial in a capital case, as I've just mentioned, from beginning to end, lasting less than 24 hours and taking place at the hour of the night and day contrary to the law. And further, consider the fact that it was at an hour in the morning at which only the Sanhedrin, rabble mob or renter mob, whatever you like to call them, was found. Jesus had multitudes of friends among the common people who, if they had known of the trial, would have been present to protest and storm the court in his favour and in his defence. Think of a modern trial today where the ordinary people crowd around the courthouse in protest. However, Jesus was not even permitted a lawyer to defend him. So the law stated a criminal case resulting in the acquittal of the accused may terminate the same day on which it began. But if a sentence of death is to be pronounced, it cannot be conducted before the following day. So the trial of Jesus was illegal because it was began and concluded in one day. Before the finding of guilty could be decreed, a night had to intervene between the trial and the decree. Why is that? Because then the judges could sleep, fast, meditate, pray, think about things, yet cool down maybe. Maybe there was all kinds of things happen in courtrooms, it gets heated, so people need to cool down. Yet the Gospels record clearly that Jesus was arrested, tried, and executed within one day. How about this one then, the seventh point? The condemnation of Jesus was illegal because the verdict of the Sanhedrin was unanimous. 71 out of 71 judges found him guilty. Does something smell? Is something fishy? Does that sound right to you? The law stated a simultaneous and unanimous verdict of guilt rendered on the day of the trial has the effect of an acquittal. If none of the judges defend the culprit, that is, if they all pronounce him guilty, having no defendant in the court, the verdict guilty was invalid, and the sentence of death could not be executed, could not be carried out. So point number 8, the sentence of condemnation was pronounced against Jesus by the Sanhedrin and was founded upon his uncorroborated confession. The law stated no one can bring an accusation against himself. It's the same today. We can't condemn ourselves. It's called entrapment. Should a man make confession of guilt before a legally constituted tribunal, such a confession is not to be said against him unless properly attested to by 2 witnesses. Now the witnesses they brought before the trial couldn't even agree with each other. So no attempt can be made to lead a man onto self-incrimination. Moreover, a voluntary confession on his part is not admitted in evidence and therefore not competent to convict him, unless a legal number of witnesses minutely or accurately corroborate his self-accusation. So, Jesus was convicted and condemned to death on legally inadmissible evidence. It was at first sought to condemn him to death on legally inadmissible evidence on the charge of sedition, but their witnesses, according to Mark, did not agree with each other. But instead of releasing Jesus, the judges, in total disregard of the law, turned to the accused and asked him, "How do you answer?" But Jesus held his peace and said nothing. By remaining silent, Jesus was invoking the right against self-incrimination. But Caiaphas insisted that Jesus incriminate himself. Thus, it is seen that it was not upon the testimony of 2 competent witnesses agreeing in all essential details as the law required that Jesus was condemned to death. Jesus was accused of blasphemy, not sedition, as the latter charge had been dropped. As to the charge of blasphemy, it was the duty of the court to seek out the truth or the falsity of the charge. At the beginning of the trial before the Sanhedrin, Jesus was charged with sedition, which was soon abandoned. The trial then proceeded on the charge of blasphemy. They couldn't get their charges straight, could they? Then, before Pilate, blasphemy was dropped and a third charge was made of high treason. High treason being the only charge that the Sanhedrin thought they could get through with the Romans, because the Sanhedrin didn't have any confidence or little confidence in their so-called trial on blasphemy. They didn't have any confidence that it would be affirmed by the one who administered the great and highly developed system of Roman justice, which was Pontius Pilate. To be certain that Jesus would be done away with, they substituted the charge of high treason against Caesar, the most serious crime known to Roman law, and one over which the Romans had exclusive jurisdiction. It was only the Romans that could put a man to death for high treason. So, in Luke 23 verse 2, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. So the Jews had not intended to get involved in all this Roman law and thus lose jurisdiction over their prized prisoner. They had hoped to secure a summary endorsement of their own judgment without a new trial by the governor. But when the prisoner was first brought before Pilate, Pilate asked, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And the Jews were a bit sneaky, they were a bit evasive. They said, "If he weren't a malefactor, would we not have delivered him up to you?" Pilate didn't take the hint. The substance of Pilate's reply to the Jews was, "I have asked for a specific charge against this man, but you have not given me an straight answer. I implied that the crime is against your own laws. If so, you try him. I do not wish to meddle." So the Jews, being thwarted, formulate the new charge of treason. So Pilate beckoned Jesus into the palace where the trial took place, and Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "Are you saying this thing for yourself, or did others tell it of me?" So Pilate did not clarify his question, so Jesus gave a true answer to both of its possible meanings. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from here." So Pilate regarded Jesus as a harmless religious fanatic, from whom Caesar had nothing to fear. He went to the rabble and produced a verdict of "not guilty. I find no fault in him at all," he said. Now, bearing in mind that time there was lots of people claiming to be the Messiah and causing all kinds of problems and issues in the country of Israel. So, suffice it to say that the record of the night trial discloses two distinct charges. Firstly, the charge of sedition, the threat to destroy the temple and thus to seduce the people from their ancient allegiance. And second, the charge of blasphemy, preferred by Caiaphas. When the false witnesses failed to agree, their contradictory statement was rejected and the charge of sedition was abandoned. Pilate had tried and acquitted Jesus. This was a proper trial in conformity with the Roman law. However, instead of setting him free, we know the familiar story of his release to the Jews who crucified him. This in spite of one illegal trial and a second legal trial in which he was found innocent. Okay, so point 9, the sentence of condemnation was pronounced in a place forbidden by the law. The law states, after leaving the hall gazette, no sentence of death can be passed upon anyone whatsoever, and a sentence of death can be pronounced only so long as the Sanhedrin holds its session in the appointed place. In the trial of capital cases, the Great Sanhedrin was required to meet in the National Temple of Jerusalem, a place called the Hall of Hewn Stones. Outside of this hall, no capital trial could be conducted and no capital sentence could be pronounced in obedience to the Mosaic injunction found in Deuteronomy. The administration of justice can be found in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 16 verses 18 to chapter 17 verses 13. So they went against their own laws. So, point 10. The members of the Sanhedrin were legally disqualified to try Jesus because the law stated there must not be on the judicial bench either a relation or a particular friend or an enemy of either the accused or the accuser. It's supposed to be impartial. Nor under any circumstances was a man known to be at enmity with the accused person permitted to occupy a position among his judges. They were all against him. So, the members of the Sanhedrin were prejudiced against Jesus, and they sat in the trial with vindictiveness in their hearts is so obvious because Jesus was interfering with the money-making schemes of the Jewish syndicate in the temple, as recorded in the Gospels. You know, Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers, and they were quite angry about it. So the Sanhedrin was against Jesus because he publicly exposed their hypocrisy to the people and desired to abolish the illegal taxes which the Sanhedrin had imposed upon the people. Wasn't that enough to prejudice that body in advance to the extent that they could not give him a fair and impartial trial? So the judges who tried Jesus were not selected, we'll go to this shortly, they were not selected with the highest considerations of choice by men. They weren't integrity, truthfulness, and therefore they were not true ministers of justice, and their decisions did not meet or give out substantial justice to all. The trial of Jesus consists in the prejudice of the Sanhedrin towards the accused. The Hebrew law required absolute freedom from all interest in the result of the trial and the entire absence of all prejudice against the accused. Yet Jesus was surrounded by hostile judges already determined upon his death. So, notwithstanding this vital disqualification, the trial of Jesus proceeded before this hostile and unlawfully convened court of the Sanhedrin. So point number 11, the condemnation of Jesus was illegal because the merits of the defence were not considered. The law stated the primary object of the Hebrew judicial system was to render the conviction of an innocent person impossible. All the ingenuity of the Jewish legislator was directed to the attainment of this end. Normally they would try and prove that the man was innocent. Jesus should not have been allowed to prove the truth as his defence. Somebody else should have been there to prove that he was innocent. The judges of the Sanhedrin are not to be condemned because they misunderstood his defence, but because they denied him all defence. At a fair trial in full daylight, it is believed that a host of friendly witnesses to Jesus could have been called before the judges, and their testimony would have established an exact fulfillment of ancient messianic prophecy in his birth, his life, his arrest, and his trial. So the only possible verdict that they could have legally rendered would have been not guilty. So let's have a look at now at the prejudice of the Sanhedrin. And history and documents are available for a study of the moral characters of the judges who sat in judgment at the trial of Jesus of Nazareth. We can draw from the historian Josephus and the Talmud to enable us to form an opinion of the moral tone of the whole assembly. So for nearly a century, 100 years that is, a detestable abuse was going on. The high priesthood, which for 15 centuries, 1500 years, had been preserved in the same family according to the divine command, the Levites, had at the time of Christ's trial became an object of commercialism. It was all about money. The sacred office was given to the one who offered the most money for it. A few priestly, aristocratic, powerful and vain families who cared for neither the dignity nor the interest of the altar quarrelled with each other for this appointment. Josephus the historian, speaking of those desiring the priesthood, says, "They struggled together. They did it by casting reproachful words against one another, and by throwing stones also. There was nobody to reprove them. But these disorders were done after a licentious manner, as if it had no government over it." And it was these men who were the chief judges of Christ. So the Talmud, going even further, says, "What a plague this is to the family, cursed by their hissing of vipers. They are high priests themselves, their sons are treasurers, their sons-in-law are commanders, and their servant strikes the people with staves." So someone else says, in the face of such low morality, is it possible to restrain one's indignation against those who sat at the trial of Christ as members of the chamber of priests? The majority of the priests belonged to the Pharisaic order, the members of which sect made religion subservient to their personal ambition. And in order to rule over the people, they used religion as a tool to effect this purpose. Very bad. So, can we be astonished at the murderous hatred which these false and ambitious men conceived for Christ? It was his words, sharper than a sword, which exposed their hypocrisy and displayed their corrupt motives. So, there are files and there are documents which for each of the 71 members of the Sanhedrin, hopefully I'll be able to find out where they are and put that in the description. But can we believe that Jesus, or even anyone else, could have received a fair and impartial trial before those men, before that court? So, the record shows that the men who comprised the Sanhedrin were immoral, ambitious and scheming priests who were mostly Pharisees, believing themselves to be both infallible and untouchable. And really and truly, the Sanhedrin did not have jurisdiction to put Christ to death. And the purpose of taking Jesus before Pilate was to confirm their sentence. Jesus was brought before Pilate from the Sanhedrin, charged with blasphemy and treason against Caesar, the exalted ruler of Rome. They had no interest in bringing him to justice, but sought to protect their own corruptness and their their pride, I suppose, their exalted religious views. Terrible people they were. So what about Pontius Pilate? So he's written about everywhere in literature, religious writings, secular writings. His records, legal acts and religious faith are very important factors in determining the merits of the Roman trial. Both Josephus and Philo have handed down a very ugly picture of this sixth Roman procurator of Judea. Philo charges him with, ready for this, corruptibility, violence, robberies, ill treatment of the people, grievances, continuous executions without even the form of a trial, endless and intolerable cruelties. Someone else says he was self-seeking and cowardly, able to perceive what was right, but without moral strength to follow it out. What about Herod then? So after the court of the Sanhedrin finished their job, they ordered Jesus to be sent to Pilate in order to have him affirm their judgment. But Pilate, that contemptible coward, fearing to do his duty and release him, sent him to Herod. In the early morning, Jesus, being guarded by Roman soldiers and surrounded by a jeering, scoffing, raging multitude of Jews, was conducted to the palace of the Maccabees on the slope of Zion, the official residence of Herod. So, what about Herod? Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee, was the man before whom Jesus was now led to be judged. The pages of history mention the name of no more shallow and contemptible character than this guy whose chief aim in life was the gratification of his passions. If you read about this guy, you'll be shocked. So, Herod opened, now this is amazing actually, Herod opened the examination of Jesus by interrogating him at length. And Jesus treated his insolent questions and contemptuous scorn with silence. It's very probable that Jesus knew his legal rights. He was a rabbi after all, and that he did not believe that Herod, sitting at Jerusalem, a place outside his province, was judicially empowered enough to examine him. Therefore, he was not legally compelled to answer. So, the trial of Christ was a farce by modern standards of justice. It was illegal also by the law of the day and that place, Israel. Jesus' arrest was illegal, and so was his examination. In the trial of any case, three facts are involved. First, the finding of fact. Second, the determination of the applicable law. And three, the application of that law to the established facts. The whole trial of Christ was illegal. His arrest was illegal on the grounds that no proof was offered of any offence. He was also arrested without a warrant and was mistreated during the arrest. The trial was at night. Night trials were contrary to their own laws. Instead of seeking the truth, they sought false witnesses. They had him condemned in their own minds before he was arrested. So, how did this happen? I just want to have a very quick look at a question that comes up sometimes. Why did Christianity appear so late? Why did Jesus come then and not now or before? And there's all kinds of reasons given. Well, it was the Roman Empire, there was peace, there was good communication, there was a common language. And that's true, that's a really good thing for, if I can put it this way, starting a new religion. You want good communication, you want peace in the world, you want common language. But I think what we've seen here is there was a point in history where the legal system, the country, the Jewish leadership was so corrupt and had been corrupt for 100 years. They'd forgotten who they were. They had forgotten that they were the people of God, that they were the chosen people. They were only interested in money and power. They'd become so corrupt. And I think it was into this point, this time in history, this is the only time in the history of Israel where I think Jesus Christ could have been crucified like this. Any other time before this, it wouldn't have happened, because there was righteousness in the land. There was no corruption. But this was a terrible, terrible time in the history of the nation. The ruling class, the people who should have known better, were corrupt. And that's why I think Jesus came then rather than not before. But I just want to finish by saying, what if you were on the jury to listen and carefully evaluate the evidence given? What decision would you come to? Basically, these leaders, these people, they basically said, we will not have this man to rule over us. What about you? Let me ask you, what will you do with Jesus? So I want to thank you for joining me on this video, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much. Bye bye.